All right. Hey, you guys, welcome back. Topic 2.5, the demographic transition model. All right. So, important topic. We're going to be looking at the demographic transition model, but also the epidemiological transition model. So, two models that we're going to examine here a little bit. And they're pretty important for the rest of this unit and from here on out. So, um, pay close attention and make sure you understand it. Okay. So, enduring understanding for this topic, you guys, a lot like the last topic, changes in population are due to mortality, fertility, and migration, and they're influenced by environmental, economic, cultural, and political factors. Right. So, the objective for this topic, you guys, we're going to be able to explain theories of population growth and decline. Okay, by looking at these two models. All right. So you'll see them now. They might make some sense, but once we go through each stage of the demographic transition model, epidemiological transition model, hopefully then it makes a little bit more sense. All right, I think this graph here is, or this graph here, but this model here, I should say, is I'd say one of the better looking ones and one that's easier to examine. So, um, you can pause the video and take a look at it before I go through each of the stages here. All right, but I mean, all of this is going to be looking at birth rate, death rate, population growth, right? So the DTM, demographic transition model, can be used to explain population change over time, right? And there are 5 stages of population changes that countries pass through as they modernize. So by looking at the DTM, we can look at different economic and social developments over time. All right. And initially, this model was, 4 stages, right? It was proposed in the 1930s, 1940s by some English geographers, right? As they saw how England was, the United Kingdom, I should say, was progressing over time. Okay. And something important to keep in mind about this is that, this isn't a value judgment on societies, right? Just because one stage is on stage 4 and another might be in stage 2, right? It doesn't mean that one society is better than the other, right? Because I mean, obviously, it's not explaining, human beings in general. It's just looking at some statistics, right? And making, a an academic guess as to how society is progressing. All right. So, DTM stage 1. Okay. So this stage is marked by low growth. We can see here that the crude birth rate is pretty high. The crude death rate is high, right? The NIR, natural increase rate, and population growth is pretty low, right? And the reason why it's low is, because, CBR, CDR, right? They're canceling each other out. Not much growth. So it means that there's a young population. And, uh, you know, even though there is no country that is in stage 1 anymore, right? It's still helpful to look at it, right? People in this stage dying off easily, lack of medicine, diseases are rampant. There's a battle with nature, right? So for much of human history, we were at stage 1, but obviously, like I said, no countries in stage 1 anymore. It was a hunter-gatherer society. Okay. I mean, there are still some examples, of some societies that are in stage 1. Um, Sentinelese Island, in close to India, if you've ever heard of that, is one example. All right. DTM stage 2. All right. So DTM stage 2 started pretty recently. If we're looking at human history as a whole, right? This was caused by the Industrial Revolution and the Medical Revolution. All right. So Europe and North America were the first places to experience this, right? Just because the fact that the Industrial Revolution began in England. All right. Countries in Africa, Asia, Latin America, they kind of experience this stage, and some are still experiencing this, right? 20th century, right? The medical revolution, you could say reached Africa, Asia, and Latin America. All right. But this is marked by by high growth, right? Crude birth rate is still relatively high, right? But the crude death rate is dropping significantly, right? Because of advancements in technology and medicine, right? There's a food surplus now. People are living longer, or beginning to live longer. of the natural increase rate and population growth rate, right, exploding, right? So we're seeing a population boom, but still the population is relatively young. Um, so also through this stage, right, new forms of jobs in some societies, even though there are new, more technical jobs, right, some societies are still relying on big families at this stage. But overall, we're seeing, better healthcare, uh, better care, medical care, clean water, better sanitation, right? And you can see some examples include Nigeria, Guatemala, Afghanistan, Yemen, right, in today's world. And we could compare this to a population pyramid, right? Like I said, Afghanistan here is an example, right? We could look at the population pyramid, right? Relatively young population, big base down here, kind of the yeah, normal looking population pyramid, we could say. Okay, so you could compare the two. Pause the video there. All right. Same with Niger here. Okay. So stage 3 of the demographic transition model, right? The Industrial Revolution, medical revolution, same thing, kicking off stage 3, continuing, all right. But stage 3 is marked by moderate growth, right? CBR is decreasing, CDR is low, right? But it's stabilizing a little bit, right? I mean, crude birth rate, right? Not just decreasing, but it's significantly decreasing, right? Natural increase rate, population growth rate, right? Moderate, it's increasing, but not that much, right? And the population's still relatively young, although it's getting a little bit older as more people begin to live longer, right? So in this stage, we see women, gender roles changing a little bit, right? Women getting more opportunities, right? Not only that, but they're going to school more, pursuing jobs, right? Which means that there's less time to have a family, right? I mean, at the very least, a large family, right? So the total fertility rate is decreasing, right? Hence why the crude birth rate is decreasing, right? And at the same time, people are moving into the cities, right? More urbanization, right, means that family size goes down. And as we looked at the last topic, why? Well, because it's a bit more expensive, right? At least that's the economic reason. Okay. So yeah, stage 2, society changes, more urbanization, kids aren't dying, people living longer, culture shift, right? More economically developed and better social opportunities. Okay. A couple of examples we could look at here: Mexico, India, South Africa, right? So we could look at Mexico. I mean, we see that there's, still a big base in the bottom, right? But we could see that it goes well into the 30s here, right? As people begin to live longer, right? And people are having less kids, right? Same thing with Turkey. Again, declining birth and death rate, right? We could see older population beginning to grow here, right? Still, most of the population is under 35. Society is young, but the percentage of elderly is increasing. Okay. Awesome. So, stage 4 of the DTM, marked by low growth or in some cases no growth, right? So, we can see here the crude birth rate, the crude death rate, they're low and they're pretty much stabilizing, right? So in some cases, the NIR and population growth rate is zero, right? Zero population growth rate, ZPG, as some geographers refer to it as, right? So age among population is beginning to be balanced, and evolution of stage 3, right? Gender roles, women are beginning to have bigger roles in society. People are pursuing long-term careers more, so time for kids is even more so reduced, and some aren't even considering kids at all, right? And some are saving marriage until they're in their 30s, right? Better medical advances, right? And those continue, longer lives, right? And as these countries develop and go into stage 4, right? I mean, obviously more urbanization, right? Stemming out gender inequality. So yeah, um, there we go. And one more note here about the ZPG, the zero population growth rate. Um, that's because the fertility rate has reached that that 2.1 number, if you remember, that replacement statistic. from the last topic. All right. So yeah, some examples: Canada, South Korea, the United States, right, or China, right? We call these stationary population pyramids, right? And we can see that it's generally speaking even here, right, from the ages of 0 all the way to in some cases 60s, right, on average. Yeah, awesome. And finally, the last stage, all right. And sometimes this is definitely debated. Some say that there's only 4 stages, right? In our case, we're just going to say there are 5 stages, all right. But the DTM stage 5, right, it's marked by negative growth, right? So we can see that the death rate is um, it's higher than the crude birth rate, all right. So CBR lower than CDR, and the CDR is low, but it increases in some cases, right? And this stage we see population decreasing, right? As people, society is so developed, and culture has shifted so much that family size is below that replacement range. So people are living longer, which means support for them increases. But as they're dying, that might increase the crude death rate. Okay, so yeah, population decreases, family size small because of culture, government policies, urbanization, economic factors, all changing this. So people have opportunities now and aren't focusing on families, right? So some examples today: Japan, Germany, right? We can see that the population, above that 45, 49 cohort range is definitely higher than kids, teenagers, young adults, right? So older age groups are going to have the largest bars and are past that reproductive and working age years. Okay. So yeah, one more time. Here's the DTM for you guys. You can see there's quite a bit to look at, but just breaking it down by stages, well, will give you a better understanding of when you finally look at it as a whole. All right. Okay. Sweet. So the next model is the epidemiological transition model, right? Yet another model. Okay. And epidemiological, right, comes from the word epidemiology, right? It's medical science that's concerned with the distribution and control of diseases. So the ETM explains how society has developed and the change in how and why people are dying as we have progressed, right? It also tracks the causes of death through each stage of the DTM. All right, so you could look at the ETM in conjunction with the DTM. All right, so this one is showing you 4 stages, right? Some say there are actually 5 stages now. All right. So again, take a look at this, examine it before you look at the see the rest of the slides here and listen to the lecture. Okay. So stage 1 of the ETM, right? This is defined by infection and famine and death, right? Kind of a depressing looking stage, right? But in this stage, life expectancy is low, death rates are pretty high, diseases spread easily, right? People are running out of food, poor nutrition, poor sanitation. Overall, not it paints a dark picture, right? Um, an example of this history, we could look at the bubonic plague, and honestly, much like the first stage of the DTM, right? Much of human history was kind of in this stage of the ETM, right? High infection rates, famine, death, right? People not living as long. Okay, awesome. So stage 2 of the ETM, right? We see pandemics begin to recede and advancements in medicine and technology, right? So again, in conjunction with the DTM, right? Industrial Revolution and Medical Revolution. So life expectancy goes up in this stage, and the infant mortality rate begins to go down, right? We see better medicine, more access to food, more urbanization, right? So less widespread diseases in general, all right? But there's still some issues, right? when it comes to increased urbanization, at least in this stage, human beings still were figuring out how to organize cities. So as people were living close together, there was still poor sanitation, right, which meant that diseases still kind of spread, but slightly improving, right. But the CDR was still relatively high, compared to the other stages. Okay, stage three, right. This is marked by degenerative and man-made diseases, right. So we see the elimination of contagious diseases, okay, but we begin to see degenerative and man-made diseases. So what do I mean by that? I mean things like heart attack, stroke, diabetes, those kinds of diseases, right? Age and health related diseases, I could say, right? So as people live longer, um, you know, basically human beings are beginning to see the effects of living long, right? As our bodies begin to decay, right? But at the same time, we're seeing more advancements in medicine and tech, so that's why people are able to live longer. Okay. That being said, though, we're beginning to see a shift, right, in culture as well a little bit, right? We're beginning to see more of that sedentary lifestyle, right? That lazy lifestyle, as I like to call it, right, where you're sitting down on your couch, watching football, eating potato chips, right? So diets begin to, for some people, right, some families, right, a little bit unhealthy, right? So food diet becomes an issue, which is why we see things like heart attacks, right, and diabetes, right? And developed nations, have the highest rates of degenerative diseases, all right? And why is that? Because developing countries, Africa, Asia, some of those, right? They're not quite at the stage yet, or quite at the DTM stage 3 or 4s, right? So people aren't living as long, so they aren't really seeing many of the degenerative or man-made diseases. Okay, stage 4, the delay of generative diseases. This is what the stage is marked by, right? So people are trying to cure cancer, prolong life, surgery is better, transplants, right? People are focusing on their lifestyles, right? So again, characterized by delayed degenerative and man-made diseases, by even better medical care that can prolong and delay all of that, right? So sanitation is definitely improved. Exercise, people are focusing on that, right? People are trying to reduce unhealthy habits, right? Tobacco, alcohol, junk food, right? Medicine continues to improve as life expectancy goes up. The risk here, though, is that people might become complacent and look at the medical care that's available, and continue to live a sedentary lifestyle, right? So obesity, becomes an issue in these countries, right? I mean, the United States, it's no secret, obesity is one of the major health problems today. Okay, and finally, stage five. In stage five, much like the stage five DTM, this is all under debate. Some just want to look at stage four, but for this, we're going to look at stage five. All right, we'll say that there is a stage five. So stage five is the reemergence of infectious diseases. Right, lots of reasons for this in this stage. Part of it is because over time diseases start to evolve, medicine becomes less effective, right? Emergence of superbugs, right? So these diseases, bacteria that cannot be countered because they've evolved to fight against antibiotics or penicillin, right? I mean, you could look at malaria today as the perfect example, right? Kind of stamped out the last 100 years here, but now there are some deep resistant mosquitoes, right? And that happens for various reasons, right? Which we'll look at in the next one, actually, right? Um, Another reason for these reemergences of infectious diseases, right, is increased urbanization, right? And especially right for low income neighborhoods, right? So we see an increase in poverty, right, which means less access to healthcare, right? And if there's less access to healthcare, maybe people trying to fight these diseases, that were stamped out, they're trying to get access to, medication, right, medicine, but maybe they're not getting the full dose, right, which means that they're not necessarily killing off these diseases, these bacterias, right? So they evolve, right? And that so these two kind of tie in to each other, right? We also see The globalization as a reason for the reemergence of infectious diseases, right? You know, the world, global, right? Lots of positives with that, right? Lots of negatives too. And one of the negatives is because there's an increased interaction globally, right? Whether, you know, we travel through plane, through boats, through cars, right? There's more exposure, right? Across different landscapes, across different countries, right? So an example, right? We could see it with COVID-19, right? You know, grew especially exponentially in urbanized areas, right? I mean, we don't need to look any further than here in the Portland metro area compared to the rest of Oregon, right? It's pretty high, all right? And those especially impacted by COVID-19 are those in the low income neighborhoods, right? Those living in poverty. Okay. So yeah, you guys, we made it, DTM, ETM. Um, a lot of it's looking through it, you know, making comparisons between some countries. But yeah, you know, we're kind of tying in 2.3 and 2.4 all together here. So yeah, awesome. All right, you guys. If you have any questions, as always, let me know.